Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Suggett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARSP. And thank you so much for joining us at today's webinar. Today's webinar is entitled Perceptions and Behaviors of Cannabis-Impaired Drivers, 2024 Results from CAA's Annual Cannabis-Impaired Driving Survey of Ontario and Manitoba Drivers. And I have the pleasure of having Teresa DeFelice with me today. So I thank her for attending and telling us about this great study. And I will give her a bio in just a minute. But first of all, I just wanted to give you a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, if there are questions, we do take questions, I should say, during the webinar, but we ask that you put them into the Q&A function throughout the webinar, and then we will address them at the end. I also wanted to make you aware of the next webinar, which is going to be entitled Exploring the Use of Wireless Sensors in Pedestrian Safety Analysis. And that's going to be on January 27th at noon. We have decided that with some of our webinars in the new year, we're going to focus them more on technology and road safety, which ties in with the theme of our conference, which I'm going to put a plug in for as well. It's in May, from the 20th to the 23rd. So I invite you to our website to check those out. So now back to today's webinar. So I have the pleasure of having Teresa DeFelice, who is the Assistant Vice President of Government and Community Relations with the CAA Club Group of Companies, or CCG. CAA Club Group is Canada's largest CAA club that includes the not-for-profit membership association and for-profit entities. Teresa joined CAA in 2005 and leads teams in Ontario and Manitoba. She is responsible for the overall direction and execution of the organization's advocacy, strategies, and programs. She also oversees CCG's corporate charity contributions programs, and she has over 25 years of hands-on experience in government advocacy and public affairs. Her breadth of knowledge on infrastructure, transportation, and road safety has contributed to the development and execution of sound public policy and the advancement of CAA's key advocacy programs. She also sits on a variety of committees and task forces, and in her personal time, she's a volunteer board member with OSED, which is Ontario Students Against Impaired Driving. So I help me welcome Teresa. It's great to have you on the show, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. It was quite an introduction, so appreciate that. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be able to meet with you today and share some of the insights from the research that we do on this. I'm going to share my screen so that you have my presentation. Let me just put that in presentation mode. Here we go. That's not quite yet in presentation mode, but we'll get there. There we go. So thank you very much to CARS for having me on to give the insights from our survey. I'm going to just sort of start to dive in so that we make some time at the end for questions and any inquiries that the participants have today. As Brenda mentioned a little bit about the organization, CAA actually started as an advocacy membership organization back in 1903. Back then it was really about safe infrastructure, road safety, mobility, similar to some of the files that we work on today. Today, we have over 2.4 million members in Ontario and Manitoba. So we are a federation of 8 clubs and 8 independent clubs. Our club just happens to have territory here in Ontario, so Central Ontario and CAA Manitoba. And then we have a national policy branch, oversight branch in Ottawa. And we have 7 million members across the country. So our almost 2.5 million members actually makes CAA Club Group the largest club in Canada. We continue a lot of that historical basis of our advocacy organization today by working in partnerships with transportation and safety experts, like many on the call today, to make transportation safe, viable for our members and Canadians alike. We're always looking for opportunities to improve road safety. Our key sort of strategic pillars today are listed on your screen. The road safety pillars all involve things like education awareness, thought leadership, public policy, and strategic partnerships. We do a lot of work in transportation and mobility and infrastructure and consumer protection, as well as offer one of the country's largest school-age safety programs called the CA School Safety Patrol Program. So let's dive into a little bit about our history on the cannabis impaired driving file. We actually started quite early. It was very clear that the government was going to move ahead back in the early days in 2017 on legalizing cannabis in Canada. And so we actually started to look at conducting surveys and research, both at the club level and the national level. At the national level, we conducted an impact study with McGill University that tested the effects of smoking marijuana on driving abilities. We also did a lot of work by meeting with counterparts through our AAA clubs, sister clubs in the States. We're all separate entities, but we have a really good reciprocal relationship with the clubs south of the border. And we did trips to Denver and had conversations with our Washington club. And, basically all the knowledge gathering we did both through the surveys that we did, the research that we did, and the conversation formed submissions to both the federal and provincial governments on insights from our work back in 2017 and even with the onset of 2018. In 2018, we continued to do surveys around the usage, laws, and perceptions, which form the basis of the research insights I'm going to share with you today. But we also started to launch a series of campaigns over the years. And so in 2018, it was a Don't Drive High campaign. This was to demonstrate how cannabis can affect the various abilities like coordination and reaction time, which really were the results of the McGill study that we did to sort of demonstrate some of the issues. We continued on in 2019, partnering with the Ontario Provincial Police and here in Ontario on sort of those myths and misconceptions of impaired driving, in particular by cannabis. And throughout 2020 to 2022, through our national office, coordinated all of the club's efforts into Do Anything But Drive campaign. A little controversial in terms of the naming of the convention, but really this campaign was really to try and just stress that effort of do anything but get behind the wheel, or don't get behind the wheel. It's in particular with edible use. So we were targeting Gen Z and edible use between 2020 and 2022, mostly as a result of trends that we were seeing from our surveys. Last year, as part of a new marketing strategy, CA Club Group moved a lot of its road safety strategy and road marketing, safety marketing, to be in places where people would see it in digital out of home, obviously on social media, really pulsing throughout the year, a number of road safety campaigns, but really also focusing on the cannabis impaired campaigns so that it would be pulsed throughout the year as a reminder about not driving while high. We also focused on an impaired driving campaign called Road Safety is No Accident. It was a radio and TV PSA done in partnership with Toronto Police Service, which launched in late 2023 and into 2024. It also won the Ontario Ministry of Transportation's Road Safety Initiative of the Year. And of course, we continue with these campaigns. You heard, if you were at the June CARSP conference, a little bit about University of Toronto, CAMH, and Western University, looking at our data to also provide some insights regarding, further targeted strategies of how to combat cannabis impaired or impaired driving. And in addition, we continue to partner with a variety of stakeholders, police, government, community stakeholders like Arrive Alive, Drive Sober, Ontario Students Against Impaired Driving. And we're really excited, about the launch of, through our national office, a timed impact study of edibles and driving being done out of the University of Saskatchewan, which is being funded in part by CAA. So we'll have those more to share in the future. Today, I'm going to focus our attention to the annual survey we do. This is the 2024 results of our cannabis-impaired driving survey. We sampled just over 1,600 Ontario licensed drivers and just over 500 Manitoba licensed drivers between the ages of 19 to 75 who have access to a vehicle or drive, and we were inquiring about their perceptions, habits, and behaviors as it relates to cannabis and driving. Throughout the presentation, there's a little legend on your screen that'll show a green arrow or a red arrow you'll see on some of the statistics that I'm presenting today. And these represent that these numbers are significantly higher or lower than our 2023 results. And this will be important as we share some of the results from this year's survey. First, I want to chat about consumption habits and perceptions when it comes to impaired driving. So you'll hear that consumption, you'll see here that substance consumption is trending upward, with Ontario seeing significant increases in its current usage of cannabis, alcohol, and prescription drugs, and illegal drugs. So the green arrows are representing the statistically higher significance over the 2023 results. The results are a bit concerning as we continue to share the results with you. It just puts a bit of a perspective on what's happening. In particular, in Ontario, I am sharing both Manitoba and Ontario results today, but what we're seeing a significant upward trend is here in Ontario, where I'm based. In both provinces, current cannabis users skew younger males living in urban areas. Throughout the survey, you will see when we give the survey, we ask people if they've ever consumed cannabis. And so we have a certain percentage that always who have not consumed cannabis but fall in the age group of licensed drivers that we're targeting and talking to. Then you'll have an ever category, and this is those admitting that they have ever consumed cannabis. In terms of the study timeline, it was 4 months or longer from the day that they were taking the survey. And then you'll see throughout the survey something called current cannabis users, often marked by P3M. And so these are the previous 3 months. Within the last 3 months before taking the survey that they are regularly consuming cannabis or have consumed cannabis. And so this is the breakdown in both provinces of, the pie is the big green square of how many licensed drivers are in each province. And then you have a breakdown based on consumption use. So consumption habits in Ontario and Manitoba. In 2024, as I said, we saw a marked increase in cannabis consumption. Over half of Ontario drivers have ever consumed cannabis, which is up 14% from our 2023 results. And 31% have consumed in the past 3 months. This particular figure is up 10% from our 2023 results. And a couple things to note among our current cannabis users, those of that past 3-month category. More than half of the current cannabis users consume substances weekly or more often. Edibles continue to be the preferred and most popular form of consumption in Ontario, followed closely by smoking a joint. That's the main forms that people are consuming their cannabis. Edible consumption is much more prominent in Ontario than it is in Manitoba as a result of in our survey. 41% of current cannabis users pair cannabis with alcohol, 3 drinks on average. And while at-home consumption remains the primary location for cannabis use, the increasing trend of out-of-home consumption, friend, family members, house, vacation spots, cottaging, or a concert or festival in Ontario could potentially pose issues, especially if people are getting back into their cars after having consumed it while they're out. Laws are different in Manitoba, where it is only legal to consume at home or place of residence versus in Ontario, where it can be publicly consumed. Legal physical dispensary, followed by government online dispensary, and friends are the most common ways that people obtain cannabis. And 42% of Ontario drivers and 36% of Manitoba drivers have tried cannabis for the first time since legalization. So what's behind the increase of cannabis consumption in Ontario? There is like I mentioned, a significant jump when it comes to cannabis specifically, a 14-point jump. While it can be difficult to fully know, we do know that overall there was an increase across all ages, gender, and regions, but mainly driven by middle-aged men in the Greater Toronto area, and that more Ontarians have tried cannabis, but the usage frequency is fairly stable versus last year. We do have a few theories at what may be driving this jump in the numbers between last year's survey and this year's survey. So there is a change in context Ontario's population has increased significantly in recent years, primarily driven by newcomers. This demographic shift could perhaps demonstrate an ability to trial or increase trial in a country where cannabis is legal versus where people have immigrated from. Economic factors, challenging economic times also can result in increased stress and higher rates of things like layoffs, which, in self-soothing, sort of turning to substances and mental health issues, sort of reliance on some substances, potentially leading to this uptick in cannabis usage as well. Growing access. In this year's study, a growing number of Ontarians are reporting that there is at least one cannabis store in their neighborhood. And of course, we know when cannabis was first legalized, the municipalities in Ontario were given the ability to decide whether they were going to allow it to be sold within their boundaries or not. And while some chose not to, like the city of Mississauga, a lot of municipalities have now changed that. And we're seeing some of those municipalities who originally said no have opened their doors to allowing the sale of cannabis within their municipal jurisdiction. A 2023 Ontario Cannabis Store study reveals, so it supports our numbers as well, reveals that the number of stores has increased in Ontario. And this study from the Ontario Cannabis Stores also indicated that 47% of Ontarians consume cannabis within a typical year. So that's very similar, related to some of our findings in the survey. Also, higher awareness. In this year's study, an increasing number of Ontarians are reporting awareness of cannabis formats. And so the various ways that you can consume cannabis, not just smoking and edibles, but oils and the different ways that cannabis can come in. But they are also expressing concern about the impact of some of these formats and on health and road safety. This year, again, we saw this increase and jump in our numbers. It also could show that there's a greater willingness to reflect on their own behavior, which could mean increased transparency in their own responses. We always stress in our surveys that these results are confidential. We're not tracking any one individual response to a user. And so we want people to answer as openly and honestly as possible. The reality is, we've had legal cannabis now for about 6 years. We're getting to a point of normalization, social norms and culture. And this could also be leading to some transparency in survey results. We asked about the dangers of cannabis-impaired driving, and while almost all drivers agree it is a serious road safety risk, we had 42% of drivers who believe alcohol-impaired driving is more dangerous. We've heard this time and time again over the years, pre-legalization, since legalization, and this study is just showing us that again. When asked why they think this, the answer leaned towards the belief that alcohol has a stronger impairment and impact than cannabis, alcohol leads to more recklessness, where cannabis leads to more focus and relaxed motives or judgment behind the wheel, and it makes you, and whereas alcohol makes you that risk taker. Finally, also that alcohol will impact your motor skills more than cannabis would, is what respondents told us. We all know that both these substances can impair you and your ability to drive. So it's critical we address some of these misconceptions and mindsets. People know alcohol is dangerous when combined with driving, and more needs to be done to increase that awareness for cannabis and driving. So just let me make sure I did that. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I did skip over one. Drivers also appear to have confidence in research on the effects of cannabis driving. So we asked if they're believing when, the studies out there. But for those who were not sure or said no, and that was that no, that they don't believe research that's out there, that's 6% in Ontario and 4% in Manitoba. They were more likely to be 19 to 34 years of age and current cannabis users, so more frequent users of cannabis. We did ask what it would take to trust research, and they shared the following: is show the medical facts of controlled tests and the impacts of cannabis on driving. More reliance on collision stats, to show that cannabis is the cause behind collisions, and real life examples of how drivers behave while under the influence of cannabis. On the collision stats, a number of years ago, we also did a focus group, and that was the other piece that came out of the conversations we had then, which was, they wanted to see believable ads. They wanted to see more stats. They tend to hear a lot about stats related to alcohol impairment or, horrific road tragedies that are caused by alcohol, but they're not hearing those stats and figures or reporting or stories as it comes to cannabis impaired driving. And therefore it strengthens the mindset that, cannabis isn't as prevalent or isn't as dangerous when it comes to alcohol and as it is when it comes to alcohol and driving, and is not resulting in the same types of road injuries or fatalities or collisions. So now we're going to move on to impaired driving behaviors. So the incidence of cannabis impaired driving in Ontario has increased compared to last year, as I've mentioned, now reaching similar levels to Manitoba. That they were showing some higher numbers originally from our 2023 study. This increase is tied to our question on out-of-home consumption, where we talked about more and more people are consuming cannabis outside of the home, even in Manitoba, where it's actually not legal to do so. In Ontario, it is very prevalent. If anyone is in Ontario or moves around, it's very prevalent in public spaces. Out-of-home consumption is happening more and more often, and so we think that's leading to some of the increase. I mentioned earlier that the increase in those who have consumed cannabis the year also, unfortunately, that did reflect in an increase who said that they have driven after consuming cannabis. 19%, or approximately 2 million Ontario drivers, have ever engaged in this behavior, according to our survey. The small bright side is that those who have done this in the past 3 months have stayed the same, around 7%. So this is probably people who have tried it, didn't realize the impact, but not regular consumers, and sort of that past 3 month category or current user category. Or this could be also tied or related to more transparency in talking about their past or what they've done in the past. And while most cannabis consumption leading to impaired driving comes from smoking, edible continues to be present for over 1/3 of the drivers who said that they have driven after consuming cannabis. In that 19% category, they tended to skew younger males living outside of the GTA in Ontario. Over half waited less than 3 hours before driving. Very concerning is that 31% felt very or somewhat high while they were driving, yet 3/4 were confident in their driving ability. 63% were worried about being caught. Excuse me. And while we included in this side on driving behaviors, not their own driving behavior, 1/3 of Ontario drivers say they have been a passenger to someone who has consumed cannabis, gotten into the car with someone who's consumed cannabis and are driving. In Manitoba, there are some similarities and some differences between the provinces. Impaired drivers also tend to skew male. Less people have ever tried cannabis, and less people reported consuming within the last 3 months. There aren't much differences when it comes to the people reported to have driven impaired, but all of the stats that I just went through on the right side in the boxes are higher than in Ontario, except for the last one. Same number, 31% of drivers have gotten into a car with a driver who has consumed cannabis. And so, these are some of the trends we're seeing and the differences between the two provinces. We've been doing this survey for every year for a long time. And so we sort of were taking a look at the last 4 surveys. And in Ontario, this does show the trend. There was a dip in 2023. It's hard to sort of say specifically. We know the 2020 to 2022 numbers, showed some interesting insights, especially during lockdowns and general consumption patterns. There was a bit of a drop in 2023 where maybe I guess there was more of a semblance of post-pandemic getting back to routine or reality. But that number has significantly risen in our 2024 results, which I have talked about a variety. We also saw with some of the increases in the numbers is, that this middle-aged men in the GTA is skewing some of the Ontario numbers higher in terms of having ever consumed cannabis. I'll talk about this slide, but I do want to note for the Manitoba numbers, you're seeing a little exclamation warning point. In Manitoba, the sample size was smaller in terms of overall survey, but for this particular question, it was very, very small. And so not the most statistically significant translation to the general driving population in Manitoba. But we asked about why they took the risks. When looking specifically at those who said they drove after consuming cannabis, in particular in the last 3 months, that current user category that we've determined, the most common reasons were, I did not think I had that much. I was driving home and that drive was going to be short. What is also interesting is we did have a portion of this group acknowledge that it's not safe to do so, but they're still sort of riding on I felt fine. And what could have influenced their decision to not drive was a question we asked. And it was mainly based on how they were feeling or if there were studies that actually showed it's dangerous to smoke while driving. But of course, we also noted in the previous questions, people are admitting to driving when they're quite high or feeling that they're quite high. So I'm going to talk a little bit about general education awareness when it comes to cannabis impaired driving. There is some good news. Excuse me. Awareness of education campaigns from all organizations like police, government, road safety organizations like Arrive Alive, OSED, CA campaigns, Manitoba Public Insurance, Mad Canada, a number of organizations has, I think, influence because there is another survey question that talks about where they may have seen education awareness campaigns from. And so it grew significantly in 2024, the impact of being able to identify penalties and fines and what those fines are for cannabis impaired driving is evident in this year's result, which is great. Awareness of the penalties increased, and only 19% were not aware of any of these penalties, which is down 33% from 33% in 2023. And 19 to 34-year-old males and current cannabis users in Ontario are more aware of any of these penalties for impaired driving in Ontario. So this is the group that, tends not to believe research. It is skewing sort of higher current usage. They know and are aware of the penalties, and yet are still engaging in the behaviors. In Manitoba, males and those living outside of Winnipeg are more aware of any of the penalties that we listed for the laws in Manitoba for impaired driving, and most familiarity being with 24-hour license suspension. Only 13% are not aware of any of these penalties, which is also down from the 2023 results of 21%. Despite the increased awareness of penalties and the various campaigns that are being offered by a variety of organizations, only half of drivers in both provinces are aware that penalties for drug-impaired driving are the same as for alcohol-impaired driving. That this is unchanged from 2023, with 1 in 5 drivers still thinking the penalties for alcohol-impaired driving are more severe. So, there's an opportunity there to sort of look at that messaging. We did see an increase of 10% who are aware of Ontario's zero tolerance law for young, novice, and commercial drivers, and a 7% increase in Manitoba and a 16% Ontario lift in awareness for a mandatory alcohol screening in terms of the police presence and having to supply and provide a mandatory screening if you're asked to do so at road stop. And so, this is fairly new in Ontario. And so I think this is a message that's been getting out there, that the penalties exist, that it is law, that if you're requested to do so, you must provide a sample. So we're starting to see that message get across as well. So we actually have gone through the survey results quite quickly, more quickly than I anticipated. So I'm going to talk a little bit about recommendations, and then we'll probably be able to get into some questions earlier. I also just want to provide that this was a very large survey, and so we've given you sort of the top highlights as well. In June at the CARSP conference, there was a presentation on sort of the research into our research and trying to get to those insights. But here are some final recommendations in terms of road safety partners or in messaging and how we need to continue to tackle and prevent incidents of impaired driving and cannabis-impaired driving. We need to really focus in and hone in on demonstrating the impact of cannabis on driving abilities. In Ontario, an increase in consumption has resulted in a larger base of drug-impaired drivers. Providing scientific research and real-life examples demonstrating the impact of cannabis on driving abilities can help persuade those who may be skeptical, or overly confident. So we need to really hone in on the right entities, which leads to some of the second recommendation, which is increase awareness among the public, whether you're police service, public health, road safety organization, really honing in on sharing stats or stories of drug impaired drivers or drug related crashes in local areas, I think is one strategy that we would highly recommend. The numbers, along with information about penalties, can help amplify the message and show it's a real problem on our roads. I think getting some of that concept through about driving impaired. We know that there's a significant proportion who are worried about getting caught and don't want to get caught. So leaning into what those penalties are, the impact of those penalties, such as license suspensions, getting your car taken away, or the car of somebody that you've borrowed taken away, impact on ability to work if you don't have access to a vehicle and you rely on a vehicle, those types of things, and really sharing real life stories. So what are some of those, not just victim impact, but those charged, those who were at fault in sort of making these choices and resulting in a situation is one way to drive home some of the message with the public, and in particular to a younger demographic. Although, we know from a variety of road safety campaigns, it's hard to target a younger demographic. And then in education awareness, partner with public health on awareness campaigns, amplify those real stories, very similar to what I just said, on the impact of drug impaired driving, including, anything relevant from your respective organizations. I think this is one where it really takes a village to come together to sort of tackle this issue. I think we all kind of hoped that the message was strong it took a long time to get the messages across about alcohol impaired driving. And of course, we haven't eliminated alcohol impaired driving and other substances used in getting behind the wheel. I think many people thought that we could get to some of these issues faster based on the fact that that took so long. But the reality is that people are still really engaging in these behaviors. There is a lot of misconception to be dealt with when it comes to the motor skills or the cognitive impact. A substance is a substance is a substance, right? And it has an impact on your ability to perform certain skills. I think we've gotten a little complacent in how we think about driving. We forget that driving is a life skill. It's a life skill for yourself and those around you. In some other work that we've done, also focusing on younger generations, honing in on that health impact. I think that the younger generations, Gen Z and younger, are sort of really focused on being more acutely aware of health and the health of those around them, and not wanting to be the reason behind causing an injury or a death. And so I think with sort of looking at these opportunities to demonstrate the impact, use research as a viable tool, increase awareness among the public, and really hone in on some of those specific categories of real life examples, that we may get closer to sort of hitting the mark on how we're going to get this message across. I've reached the end of sort of the results of the surveys. That's the 2024 survey. This is my contact information, and we do have some information about our cannabis impaired driving work on our websites, both in Ontario and Manitoba. And so that's that information for you there. So I'll leave that up for a moment while I come out of presentation mode so I could just see everybody. I'll stop sharing, but if I have to go back to any of the slides, I can do that as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. The excellent presentation, very enlightening, interesting trends that have happened over the years that you've been doing this survey, in particular the change over this last year in particular, in terms of increasing levels of cannabis, with some positive results as well, like in terms of the number of people that believe or are knowledgeable about the penalties. So that was good news. And I agree with your assessment about Gen Zers. They seem to be ones that are more health conscious, and so that's a good thing. Going forward, like we different messaging to them compared to the main problem group, which seems to be the middle-aged males, where they need more evidence, need more. Yeah, there's so many misconceptions, as you said, in terms of the way it affects your body and your driving and so forth. And it's surprising, even after all these years of like education campaigns, you think it would sink in by now, but it still hasn't. And it's just kind of, how do we reach them? And you give some great suggestions of how we can do that going forward with more statistics and real life examples and so forth. And but yeah, no, very interesting stuff. So thank you so much. It was
My
great.
pleasure. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's also why we're seeing such an uptake in edibles, right? Because this concept of smoking a joint or smoking cannabis is sort of related to the whole smoking and anti-smoking and the dangers of smoking. But again, those metabolize very differently too. And so I'm really looking forward to the results of the University of Saskatchewan Green Lab using edibles and its impact on driving. And being able to take some of that research forward as well for future campaigns.
Yeah, no, good point. And getting that information out there that edibles have a big effect, obviously, like similar to the smoking, and there's the delayed aspect of it too. And you're really taking a risk if you're going out and just not even sure when it's going to take effect. So
Yeah.
yeah, very good. So we'll turn it over to questions, and I do see one in the Q&A area, and I just invite people to keep contributing questions to the Q&A. That would be great. So I've got a comment here. Great work, Teresa. And then a question, where, how do you place this study work in the Safe System Vision Zero approach to road safety in Canada?
Great question, and thank you for that. I think it's we're seeing this sort of culmination of the road safety approaches, safe system, in the federal road safety plans. We're having some conversations with government in Ontario about putting more of a focus on Ontario having a road safety strategy and looking at safe systems. Um, and I think what's really good about the safe systems approach is also focusing on, we do have to take some time and look at road behavior. So, there's a variety of pieces of the puzzle, a variety of tools in terms of what we look at in terms of road safety under the safe systems approach, and road behavior is there, and really making that part of government initiatives and plans and strategies. It has to happen at all levels, and I think there are bits and pieces that are coming from the federal level. We've had conversations with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation about really honing in on bringing back strong education campaigns, widespread education campaigns when it comes to road safety, things like cannabis-impaired driving, distracted driving, alcohol-impaired driving. Like there's the top four in many provinces are sort of road tragedy related causes. And because Safe Systems does sort of hone in on that approach around, one is road safety behavior and individual behavior, I think it makes a great connection to be able to say, here are these results. This is why you need to make sure that you bring these approaches in, and that you're earmarking the right dollars, and that you're doing it at all ends, right? It's coming from various ministries. I also think, we're seeing some changes here in Ontario too about devices for like alcohol impaired. So we're looking at some of the technologies, vehicles are advancing. I think there's a few different places within the safe systems approach where this information could be really valuable. In some countries, they look at health in a very different way, including the vehicle, in terms of the materials that are used in the vehicle or how people interact with the materials in the vehicle. And I think there's some opportunity to think about how to prevent, we've got things that will beep to tell us not to go into a lane because there's another car there. Also, what can we do? What kind of messaging can the various components of safe system bring to the table to combat other types of road safety issues?
Perfect. Thank you so much. And you'd mentioned as well, asking about the awareness of different penalties and the enforcement side of it, and how that was a really key thing as well. So that's another piece that you mentioned in your presentation. And we know that the whole deterrence effect, that if they even just know that they might get caught, that has an effect on them. So just making them more aware of those penalties, and that also has a role for sure. So now you'd mentioned before the different aspects that would have led to that possible increase. You talked about economic and possible immigration, and then you shared as well that it's that young population, that I should say young males in the Toronto area. Do you see yourselves targeting a campaign directly at that particular group with very specific messaging that would appeal to, or would have more of an effect, I guess,
Yeah.
of their behavior? Is that something on the horizon?
Our national work has been focused on that through the development of the national campaign that all clubs can take down into their club territories. And
Yeah.
so this has been focused on the younger demographic, Gen Z, with the Do Anything But Drive. It was a series of PSA type videos around, just edible use, and sort of demonstrating sort of some of the scenarios, the delay, the aspects of not understanding even your environment, and that that means you should not be getting into a car and driving, or getting into a car with someone who's driving who's been under the influence. I think it's an interesting point when we talk about this perception of Gen Z that I've heard in the past too, things like everybody knows like to have a designated driver because if people are going to drink, but it's okay for that person to consume cannabis. And then with edibles, we're seeing that younger, health factor, but I don't know that they understand the differences in the health aspects, the metabolization. So again, these are some of the misconceptions. That designated driver is zero anything, not cannabis. And edibles do go through your body differently than smoking a joint. And they're both impairment. They both cause impairments. So I think that we've taken some of our campaigns and, you have to update them from time to time and rerun them. I think the biggest challenge is getting them across what is the right messaging. I mentioned earlier, we did a bit of a focus group with some younger generations about 2 years ago. And we asked, like, is it humor? Are you looking for humor? How do you feel? We know there's some research on doom and gloom or very tragic scenes. But what we were told was show us the real talk. We don't want an influencer that we watch for fashion advice to all of a sudden tell us not to be driving impaired. We want to see the trauma room doctor. We want to hear from the first on scene provider, whether that's fire or ambulance or the police.
Mhm.
And, we want to hear from those in authority who are going to tell us the real talk. Because, of course, over the last few years, we've had this what's real, what's not real, fake news
Mhm.
conversation. So they want those in authority who are going to share real situations and get those messages across. This is a challenge of reaching a generation whose, attention span is very short.
Yeah,
What will make them stop for an authority who will give them the straight goods?
yeah, very good points. That's great. I'm just going to keep going with the questions here. One person asked, did you divide the usage for recreational and medical reasons?
We did not. We did
Okay,
not ask if people are consuming for medical reasons.
okay,
We again, this has been broached in previous focus groups when we first started doing the survey, but it's not something we've made a standard question in our year-over-year survey.
okay. Another question is, unlike alcohol, which is comparatively easy to measure in the blood, breath, urine, how do you think the difficulties professionals have measuring the THC's influence, usage, and willingness to take risks?
Thanks for that question. This has been part of our recommendations to government and to police partners and they've made some changes in terms of the reporting. The reality is if you pull someone over or someone's been in a collision, and the police officer gets there and impairment is evident, you can issue a mandatory alcohol screening and it's pretty accurate and strong. And then, you could have a drug recognition experts. I don't know how many police services at this point are doing the oral swabs on site. Drug recognition experts, sometimes you have to wait or you have to take them back to a station. It is easier for the police to just hone in. They can put that there's drug impairment as well, but it's easier for everybody to hone in on that alcohol impairment. It's got such a tried and true process and conviction level and I think that's helped sort of get to where we've gotten to about don't alcohol and drinking, don't do it, or designated driver, don't do it. So there is a real challenge with understanding how THC is detected, uh you know is what a drug recognition expert is, how how do they have the authority to be able to determine impairment, and whether that is translating into the other side, what happens at court, the testimony being addressed or believed, and convictions are happening and impact is happening. So, and we know those processes take a long time, but some focus there to demonstrate that that's actually can result in the things that will help especially younger people believe that it does cause impairment, a charge could happen, a conviction could happen, your life could be impacted, you may have impacted someone else's life. This stuff is actually happening. They're just not hearing it and seeing it to the same significance as we have had and usually hear when it comes to alcohol impairment.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, so I've got another question here. Teresa, have you done similar analyses with your data going back to 2017, 2018? Or is there a recognition that the COVID impact would have unduly skewed the data results?
So, we've looked at the numbers. The numbers have increased. And of course, during COVID, I think the road safety and health professionals, a lot of alarm bells were sort of out there around consumption of different substances was high all around, right? And so that slide where we saw the dip in 2023, but the reality is this uptake that we're seeing in 2024. I would have to pull the numbers back from 2017, but the numbers have continued to go up, right? And I think, again, this big jump that we're seeing probably results of a number of different things, but I also want to say there is really a normalization that's happening. And I think we need, we knew cannabis was being consumed before legalization, right? But I think there's this normalization in the culture, in our culture, so that transparency is there. I think there's just some factors that you can't sort of account for, but we know everybody's numbers were up when it comes to the different substances during the pandemic. But those numbers were still higher than 2017 and 2018. And of course, the numbers we're seeing today are significantly higher than back then.
So are you saying then that because in 2024, as you said, it's people are more comfortable or they're seeing it more normalized using cannabis, that they're more willing to share that they do use cannabis in your survey and that they have driven while they've
It's
been high?
it's an assumption. So the assumption that we have, is an assumption that there might be some normalization. So when taking a survey back in 2017, 2018, people might not have been sure if those results were truly, are they really anonymous or not? Or is there a risk in stating the results truthfully? But we know we had numbers there, like people were consuming cannabis and people were admitting to driving while high. I think what because we're looking at such a big jump and we're not totally sure of, again, there are assumptions, economic times, social impact, like all of these things
Yeah.
are probably driving population growth. All of these things will drive, but this middle-aged category. So some of the significance in the jump happened around middle-aged men in the GTAs, in particular for Ontario. And again, it could be they used to when they were young, didn't because they grew up. Now it's legal, trying it again. I don't know. There is this normalization that's happening, that it's available, it's everywhere, there's different formats. And I think we can't ignore that fact, that times have changed. Like I think we've hit a tipping point. There was another point I was going to make. Let me see if it'll come back to me around the COVID and the data results. So we will look at, we are going to be doing some longer term trending for our data results. So we'll continue to keep you posted on that.
Yeah, it's interesting the increase in edibles. And I'm curious whether people think that that has less of an impact on their ability to drive or just their cognitive abilities overall compared to other forms of cannabis. And especially because there is the delay when it takes effect. So it may make them think, oh, well, I'm not really feeling the effect of it. Meanwhile, an hour or two later, they really feel it. But I'm just curious if you've ever uh, thought about dividing that out in terms of how they feel it impacts their impairment and whether it's different with edibles compared to other forms. And
Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, I'll just
Yeah,
leave
no,
it there.
I think there's always some opportunity with the survey. We've asked this, a lot of the same questions every once in a while. We add some new questions like, seeing cannabis stores in their neighborhoods. I think, it's a matter of what questions do we want to take off in order to put on, because it's already a fairly long survey. I also think a previous question around medical versus recreation use is very interesting
Mhm.
because, there has been also more of an increase in sort of using, medical cannabis or cannabis for medical reasons. And so we haven't sort of teased that out up to this point out of the survey, but there might be a couple of opportunities to just unpack a couple of different things within the survey, edibles and edibles on driving, and so the reason why people are consuming.
Yeah, well, it's very enlightening your results, and it really it answers a lot of questions, but it also generates a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And but overall, I think it's doing a great job of helping us to monitor what's happening, to be able to like target specific populations, to have a better idea of how people think, in terms of their impairment after they've taken different substances. So thank you for all the great work that you do, and which is much broader than this survey. As you said, there's many other things that you guys are involved with and support, and you support CARSP, which is awesome too, in the past. And so I don't see any other questions. So actually, there is one more question, and I think we'll kind of leave it after this. Are you aware of any change in use as a consequence in increase of ridership of electric scooters, bikes? And I don't know if you looked at that in your survey, I guess, like whether
Not
people.
in the survey, and not that I have any survey that could speak to that. I think, there's some anecdotal conversations that happen when, there's some conversations about e-bikes or, different micromobility and what's happening when people are losing their license. But we have not done any survey work on that.
Yeah, that's a whole other
Yeah.
big area, right?
Yeah, this survey was specifically focused on vehicles, drivers, those who have a license and
Yeah.
either have a car or have access to a car and drive.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, and thank you again for taking the time out. I know you're a very busy lady, and this is great information. And hopefully, we can have
Pleasure.
you again in next year to give another update, or as soon as you do another report. We'd love to keep up to date with what's happening. So, thank you guys so much, and appreciate you always coming on. So,
Thank you
have
so much. And thanks everybody for attending today.
a great rest of your day, everybody.
Take care.
Take care.